Shadow Collector. I arrived in Ash Hollow on a gray afternoon, the kind of day that feels like twilight has decided to linger. The village was nestled in a valley surrounded by dense forests, the skeletal trees swaying like warning fingers in the wind. I had inherited my grandmother's house, an old two-story structure that leaned slightly to one side, as if tired of standing for decades. I hadn't visited Ash Hollow since I was a child, and my memories of it were patchy at best. Grandma Margot had been a mysterious figure in our family, her life shrouded in vague tales of superstition and isolation. But I remembered her house, creaky floorboards, a persistent draft, and the attic she had always forbidden me to enter. As I stepped inside, the scent of aged wood and something faintly metallic filled my nose. The furniture was covered in white sheets, like ghosts frozen in mid-drift. I spent the first few hours unpacking, pushing aside the nagging feeling that the house itself was watching me. By evening, I was exhausted. I sat in the small kitchen with a cup of instant coffee, the kind that tasted more like regret than caffeine, when I noticed something odd. The light from the flickering bulb above me cast my shadow against the wall, but it looked wrong. Shorter. As if someone had taken scissors to its edges. I chalked it up to poor lighting. But the unease stuck with me, trailing me as I made my way upstairs to the bedroom. That night, I dreamt of darkness, a deep, consuming black that seemed alive. And somewhere in the void, a voice whispered, "It begins." The next morning, I ventured into the village, hoping to learn more about Ash Hollow and its peculiarities. The main street was eerily quiet. The few people I saw avoided my gaze and crossed to the other side of the road. A shopkeeper, a wiry man with sunken eyes, reluctantly told me where to find the library. The library was small but well-maintained. Inside, an older woman with sharp features sat behind the counter. Her name tag read Ms. Hollis. She looked up from her book and gave me a curt nod. "You must be Margot's grandson," she said. Her voice carried the weight of unspoken knowledge. "People in town have been talking." "About what?" I asked, though I already sensed the answer would unsettle me. She hesitated before replying, "Your shadow. It's fading." "What does that mean?" My voice was barely a whisper. Ms. Hollis sighed, closed her book, and gestured for me to sit. "This town has a history, young man. A long, dark history. They say there's a creature that lives in the shadows. The Shadow Collector. It takes what it wants, piece by piece, until there's nothing left of you." I laughed nervously. "That's just a story, right?" She leaned closer, her eyes boring into mine. "It's not just a story. Your grandmother knew about it. She fought it once, but she couldn't destroy it. And now that you're here, it's awake again." I left the library with my heart pounding, her words looping in my mind. Back at the house, I found myself staring at my shadow again. It was definitely shorter than it had been yesterday. Panic clawed at my chest. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew better. That night, I dreamt of the shadow again, but this time, it had eyes. Crimson orbs glinting in the darkness. And it whispered my name. The next day, I decided to search the house for answers. Grandma Margot had always been a private person, but there had to be something here that could explain what was happening. I started with the attic, the forbidden room of my childhood. The door creaked open to reveal a space cluttered with dust-covered boxes and old furniture. I rummaged through the contents, finding yellowed papers, photographs, and trinkets. In one box, I uncovered a leather-bound journal with Margot's name scrawled on the cover. It felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried more than just words. The entries detailed her encounters with the Shadow Collector. She described it as an ancient force tied to the village, something that thrived on fear and despair. Margot's words were frantic, each page filled with warnings and desperate theories. One passage stood out. It takes the shadows to feed. The weaker the shadow, the closer it comes. But there's a way to fight it. The mirror, the silver mirror, is the key. I searched the attic until I found it, an ornate hand mirror with a silver frame, tucked away in an old chest. The glass was oddly clear, almost too perfect. Holding it, I felt a strange energy, as if the mirror was humming softly in my hand. That night, I kept the mirror by my side as I slept. The dreams returned, but this time, the darkness recoiled when the mirror appeared in my hand. The crimson eyes narrowed, and the voice hissed, "You cannot hide." Over the next few days, I noticed the villagers becoming more distant. Whispers followed me wherever I went. Some people glared at me with thinly veiled hostility, while others avoided me entirely. It was as if they blamed me for the collector's return. One evening, I heard a commotion outside. Stepping onto the porch, I saw a man in the distance, his shadow writhing unnaturally beneath him. He screamed, clutching at the air as if trying to hold on to something invisible. Then, in an instant, his shadow snapped away from him, dissolving into the ground. He collapsed, lifeless. The villagers gathered, muttering prayers and clutching charms. I overheard fragments of their conversation. "It's happening again. He's marked us all. The newcomer, he's brought it back." My stomach churned with guilt and fear. Back inside the house, I locked the doors and sat in the kitchen, gripping the silver mirror like a lifeline. The light overhead flickered, and the shadows in the room seemed to stretch toward me. The voice returned, low and guttural, "You cannot escape, Luke. Your shadow is mine." I raised the mirror, and for the first time, I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the room, its form shifting like smoke. Its eyes burned like embers, and its mouth twisted into a cruel smile. The collector. The sight of the collector froze me in place. My breath caught, my chest tightened, and I could feel the sweat forming on my brow despite the icy chill in the room. The collector's form wavered, shifting like liquid darkness, its red eyes piercing through me as though it could see my very soul. With trembling hands, I held up the silver mirror. The creature's twisted smile faltered, and it let out a sound that was both a growl and a hiss. The air in the room grew heavier, the shadows retreating slightly, as though the mirror burned them. "Leave me alone," I managed to croak, my voice trembling. "You can't have my shadow." The collector tilted its head, studying me. Its voice was a low rumble, like the echo of footsteps in a cavern. "Foolish boy. You cannot defy the ancient pact. Your shadow weakens with every breath, every heartbeat. Soon, it will be mine." I mustered every ounce of courage I had and stepped forward, the mirror raised like a shield. "Why me? What do you want from me?" The creature's form shifted closer, its edges blurring into the darkness around it. "You carry the blood of the keeper." Margot thought she could escape her fate, but her defiance only delayed the inevitable. "The pact demands balance. Shadows must be collected. Sacrifices must be made." I took another step forward, forcing myself to meet its fiery gaze. "What pact? What balance?" The collector's voice softened, almost hypnotic. "The keeper's line must pay the price. Margot's refusal to complete the circle has brought chaos. Restore the balance, and I will spare you. Resist, and your shadow will be the first of many." Before I could respond, the creature dissolved into the darkness, leaving the room cold and silent. My legs gave out, and I collapsed into the chair, clutching the mirror as if it were the only thing tethering me to the world. The next day, I scoured Margot's journal for more clues. The entries became increasingly fragmented, her handwriting growing erratic as she detailed her final days. One passage caught my attention. "The collector's power lies in the circle. To break the curse, one must restore the balance. The silver mirror reveals the truth, but the price is steep." The words were accompanied by a crude sketch of a circular symbol surrounded by runes. Margot had drawn an X through it, as if she had intended to destroy it but couldn't bring herself to finish the task. The journal's last entry simply read, "Forgive me, Luke." A chill ran down my spine. I realized that Margot had known all along that I would inherit her burden. She had left the mirror and the journal as tools, but the responsibility to end the curse was mine. That evening, I ventured back into the attic with the mirror and the journal. Using the sketch as a guide, I began searching for anything resembling the symbol. Hours passed, the dim light of my flashlight casting long, eerie shadows across the room. Just as despair began to take hold, I noticed faint carvings on the wooden floorboards beneath a pile of old furniture. Brushing away the dust, I uncovered the incomplete circle. The symbols etched into the wood were faint but still visible, their intricate patterns glowing faintly in the mirror's reflection. Margot must have started the ritual but stopped before completing it. With a deep breath, I began tracing the missing lines with a piece of chalk. The air grew heavy, and a low hum vibrated through the attic. The shadows around me writhed as if alive, but I pressed on, determined to finish what Margot had started. When the last line connected, the circle blazed with silver light, illuminating the attic with an otherworldly glow. The shadows recoiled, and the hum grew into a deafening roar. The collector's form materialized in the center of the circle, its eyes blazing with fury. "You dare defy the pact," it roared, its voice shaking the very walls. I held up the mirror, the reflection catching the creature's form. It recoiled, its shape flickering like a dying flame. "The pact ends here," I said, my voice steady despite the terror coursing through me. "No more shadows. No more sacrifices." The collector let out an ear-splitting shriek, its body contorting as the circle's light grew brighter. For a moment, it looked almost human, its fiery eyes filled with something akin to sorrow. Then, with one final scream, it collapsed into the circle, dissolving into tendrils of smoke that vanished into the air. The light from the circle faded, leaving the attic in darkness. I sat there for what felt like hours, the silver mirror still clutched in my hand. When I finally found the strength to stand, I noticed that my shadow had returned to its full length, its edges no longer frayed. But the victory was bittersweet. As I descended the attic stairs, I felt a strange emptiness settle over me. The villagers avoided me more than ever, their whispers growing louder. Ms. Hollis refused to meet my gaze when I visited the library to return the journal. "You've done it, haven't you?" she said softly, her voice tinged with both awe and fear. I nodded. "The collector is gone." She sighed, her eyes filled with pity. "For now. The balance may be restored, but the cost is never truly paid. Be vigilant, Luke. The shadows remember." Days turned into weeks, but the unease in Ash Hollow didn't lift. The villagers were polite but distant, their eyes darting away whenever they saw me. The collector's shadow had been banished, but the scars it left on the town, and on me, were harder to erase. The house felt emptier now. Every creak of the floorboard seemed louder, every shadow cast by the dim light seemed to linger too long. I couldn't shake the feeling that the collector's absence had left a void, one that the house itself mourned. One evening, I decided to examine the silver mirror again. Its surface was flawless, almost unnaturally so. Turning it over in my hands, I noticed an inscription on the back that I hadn't seen before. "The light reveals, the darkness consumes." The words sent a shiver down my spine. It felt like a warning, though I couldn't decipher its full meaning. I placed the mirror back on the mantel, unwilling to let it out of my sight. That night, the dreams returned. The collector was gone, but the void it left behind was not. In the dream, I stood in a vast, empty field, the ground cracked and lifeless. Above me, the sky was split in two, one half blazing with light, the other shrouded in darkness. From the shadows, I heard a familiar voice whisper, Balance is never permanent. The next morning, I awoke with a pounding headache and an overwhelming sense of dread. The sunlight streaming through the window felt cold, unnatural. When I glanced at my shadow, it seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to visit Ms. Hollis again, hoping she could help me understand the mirror's inscription and the dream. The library was as quiet as ever, the musty scent of old books filling the air. Ms. Hollis looked up from her desk, her sharp features softening when she saw me. "Luke," she said, closing the book she'd been reading. "What brings you here?" I hesitated before answering. "I need to know more about the collector. And about the balance it spoke of." Her expression darkened, and she gestured for me to sit. "The collector was just one part of a greater force," she began. "It fed on shadows, yes, but it was only a servant. The balance it spoke of is older than this village, older than the collector itself." "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice tinged with frustration. "I thought destroying the collector would end this." Ms. Hollis shook her head. "Destroying the collector disrupted the balance. Nature abhors a vacuum, Luke. Something else will take its place." A chill ran through me. "Something worse?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she handed me an old, leather-bound book. "This might help you understand. It's a collection of accounts from those who've faced similar entities. But be warned, knowledge has its own price." Back at the house, I pored over the book. Its pages were filled with cryptic writings, diagrams, and testimonies from people who had encountered shadowy forces. One passage stood out. "When one shadow is banished, another rises to claim the void. The cycle is eternal, but the vessel can choose its form. Beware the temptation to wield the darkness, for it will consume the wielder." The words echoed in my mind as I flipped to a page with a familiar symbol, the circle I had completed in the attic. Below it was a warning. "Completion is not the end, it is the beginning." A sudden noise from the attic snapped me out of my trance. The sound of shuffling footsteps and faint whispers sent a surge of adrenaline through me. Grabbing the silver mirror, I climbed the creaking stairs, my heart pounding with each step. The attic was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the circle on the floor. But something was different. The carvings had changed, their patterns shifting as though alive. And in the center of the circle stood a figure, its form cloaked in shadow but unmistakably human. "Who are you?" I demanded, raising the mirror. The figure turned slowly, revealing a face that was eerily familiar. It was me, or at least, a darker version of myself. Its eyes glinted with the same crimson hue as the collector's, and its lips curled into a cold smile. "You cannot escape what you are," it said, its voice a distorted echo of my own. "The balance demands a vessel, and you have already been chosen." Panic gripped me as I backed away, the mirror trembling in my hands. The shadowy version of myself stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate. "I won't let this happen," I said, my voice cracking. "I'll fight you." The figure laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "Fight me? You'd only be fighting yourself. The darkness is already within you, Luke. Embrace it, and you might survive. Reject it, and you'll be consumed." I glanced at the mirror, its surface reflecting both the shadowy figure and my terrified face. The words inscribed on the back came to mind: "The light reveals, the darkness consumes." Taking a deep breath, I raised the mirror and stepped into the circle. The glow intensified, the air vibrating with energy. The shadow recoiled slightly, its form flickering. "What are you doing?" it hissed. "Restoring the balance," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what that meant. Holding the mirror high, I focused on the light it reflected. The shadow screamed, its form breaking apart like smoke caught in a gale. The circle's glow intensified until it was blinding, and then, with a deafening crack, everything went dark. When I awoke, the world felt altered. The attic was cold and silent, the glow of the circle extinguished. My head throbbed as I pushed myself upright, clutching the silver mirror still in my hand. The surface was no longer flawless, cracks now spider-webbed across it, as though it had absorbed the force of the confrontation. The figure, the dark version of me, was gone, but its presence lingered. The air felt heavy, oppressive. I stumbled down the stairs, my body trembling with exhaustion. The house seemed darker than before, the walls pressing in around me. Even the light from the windows seemed dimmed, as if the shadows outside had begun to encroach. I tried to shake the feeling of unease as I examined the mirror. Its inscription was barely visible beneath the cracks, but the words seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. The light reveals, the darkness consumes. I couldn't ignore the implications any longer. The collector had been vanquished, but the balance it spoke of had shifted. Something new had awakened, something tied to me. And I wasn't sure if I had the strength to face it. As the days passed, the village's unease grew palpable. Whispers followed me wherever I went. The villagers avoided eye contact, their faces pale with fear. Rumors swirled of strange occurrences, livestock vanishing without a trace, shadows that moved independently of their owners, and a low, mournful sound that echoed through the night. Miss Hollis was the only one who didn't shrink away when I approached her at the library. Her eyes were sharp, her expression grim. She seemed to know more than she let on, and I decided to confront her. "You knew this wasn't over," I said, placing the cracked mirror on her desk. "Tell me what's happening." She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "The collector's destruction wasn't the end, Luke. It was a release. The balance it maintained has shifted, and the void it left behind is spreading. The darkness is seeking a new vessel." "And you think that vessel is me?" I said, my voice shaking. Her silence was answer enough. She opened the leather-bound book she'd given me before, flipping to a page near the end. The illustration showed a figure surrounded by swirling shadows, its face obscured. Beneath it were the words. "To hold the darkness is to become its guardian. To reject it is to invite chaos. You have a choice to make," she said. "The balance demands a vessel. If you don't accept it, the darkness will consume everything in its path until it finds another host." The weight of her words pressed down on me as I left the library. The streets of Ash Hollow were eerily quiet, the air thick with tension. I couldn't stop thinking about the choice I had to make. Accepting the darkness meant becoming something else entirely, something I feared. But rejecting it, I'd already seen the chaos that could bring. That night, the dreams returned. This time, I stood in the center of the attic circle, the silver mirror in my hands. Shadows swirled around me, their voices a cacophony of whispers. They spoke of power, of eternity, of the price of refusal. "You cannot escape your fate," the voices hissed. "Accept us, and we will give you strength. Deny us, and you will doom them all." I woke in a cold sweat, the whispering voices still echoing in my ears. The house felt alive, its shadows lengthening and shifting as if watching me. The silver mirror lay on the bedside table, its cracks glowing faintly in the dark. I couldn't run from it any longer. The attic was waiting, the circle's faint glow pulsing like a heartbeat. I climbed the stairs, the mirror heavy in my hand. The air grew colder with each step, the whispers growing louder. When I reached the attic, the circle's light intensified, bathing the room in an eerie glow. The shadows coalesced in the center, forming a figure that was neither human nor entirely alien. Its eyes burned with crimson light, and its voice was both many and one. "The balance must be restored," it said, its tone both commanding and pleading. "You are the vessel. You are the choice." I stepped into the circle, the mirror clutched tightly in my hands. What happens if I refuse? The shadows shifted, their edges fraying like smoke. The darkness will spread. The light will fade. All will fall into chaos. And if I accept? I asked, my voice trembling. The figure extended a shadowy hand toward me. You will become the guardian. The keeper of the balance. But you will no longer be human. I looked at the mirror, its surface reflecting my pale, terrified face. The inscription glowed faintly, a reminder of the choice before me. The light reveals, the darkness consumes. Taking a deep breath, I made my decision. The air in the attic thickened as the shadows closed in around me, the figure at the center waiting with an eerie patience. Its extended hand seemed to pull at my very soul, a silent demand to accept the weight of the darkness. I clutched the silver mirror, its cracked surface vibrating faintly against my skin. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to flee, to escape the fate that loomed before me. But I knew, deep down, that running would only delay the inevitable. The balance would always seek its vessel, and if not me, then someone else would bear this burden. Someone weaker. Someone who wouldn't stand a chance. I will accept it, I said finally, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. But on my terms. The shadowy figure tilted its head, intrigued. Your terms, it echoed, its voice rippling like a stone dropped into a still pond. I won't be your puppet, I said, stepping closer. If I'm going to be the guardian of this balance, I need the power to shape it. No more mindless feeding on innocence. The darkness serves the light, not the other way around. For a moment, the figure was silent, its form shifting and twisting as though considering my words. Then, it nodded. The balance allows for no tyranny, it said. But beware, mortal. Power has its own price. Without another word, it dissolved into a swirling mass of shadows that surged toward me. I braced myself, the silver mirror held high, its fractured surface catching the dim light of the attic. The shadows enveloped me, cold and suffocating, their whispers filling my ears. Images flashed before my eyes, lives consumed by the collector, the anguish of those left behind, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. Then, silence. When I opened my eyes, the attic was still. The glow of the circle had faded, leaving only the faint carvings etched into the floorboards. The silver mirror lay shattered at my feet, its fragments glinting in the dim light. My hands trembled as I looked at them, half expecting to see the darkness lingering on my skin. But they were unchanged. The whispers were gone, replaced by a profound stillness that seemed to resonate deep within me. The oppressive weight that had haunted Ash Hollow for generations had lifted, leaving the air lighter, cleaner. Yet, I could feel the darkness inside me, coiled and waiting. It wasn't a burden, not exactly. It felt more like potential. As I descended the attic stairs, the house seemed to come alive around me. The shadows no longer crept along the walls, they stayed where they belonged, passive and inert. The villagers' fear had fed the collector, but now that fear was gone. I was the balance now. And it was my responsibility to ensure it remained intact. The village was quiet when I stepped outside, the morning light soft and golden. People peered out of their windows as I walked down the main street, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and hope. Miss Hollis met me at the library steps, her sharp eyes scanning my face. "It's done," I said simply. She nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "And you?" she asked. "What have you become?" "The guardian," I replied. "Nothing more. Nothing less." She seemed satisfied with my answer, though her gaze lingered on me as though searching for something deeper. "The village owes you a debt it can never repay," she said. "But be careful, Luke. The balance is fragile. And the line between guardian and tyrant is thinner than you think." I didn't stay in Ash Hollow much longer. The villagers needed time to heal, and I needed to understand my new role. The darkness within me was quiet for now, but I could feel its power, a pulsing presence that reminded me of its existence with every breath I took. Months later, I found myself standing on the edge of a cliff, the ocean stretching out endlessly before me. The wind tugged at my clothes, carrying with it the scent of salt and freedom. The shadows at my feet moved in harmony with the light, no longer shrinking or growing unnaturally. I had learned to live with the darkness, to wield it without letting it consume me. The balance wasn't a burden, it was a responsibility. One I would carry for as long as I could. But in the quiet moments, when the world was still and the night stretched long, I could still hear the whispers. They were softer now, less insistent, but they were there. A reminder that the struggle between light and darkness was never truly over. And neither was my watch.